I'm Mary Jane Rooney, Professor of Architecture at Heriot-Watt University. First, prior to answering that, what I'd like to say to you is that architecture is something that really matters to us as people. Architects design the built environment and the spaces between buildings. They design our homes, they design our temples, our churches, all of the buildings that we experience, and they represent an incredibly important effort by civilization to express its meaning through architecture. So it's a really interesting subject because it spans between art, science and technology. It provides a synthesis across all of those subjects, and it's an incredibly important subject, and it matters for humanity as well as for the built environment. Architecture is the second oldest profession in the world, and the most usual historic requirements for the subject were art, mathematics and physics. However, that has now broadened considerably, and in fact many schools of architecture are located either in schools of built environment, technology courses, or even schools of art. So you will find that requirements are different between each university. However, a very common requirement for a school of architecture is that students have good academic grades, ideally in maths, and that they have an art portfolio. For students who don't have an art portfolio, they can always prepare by doing a foundation course in arts. However, I'd like to talk a little bit about the qualities that you require to study architecture, which are perhaps more important for the subject. Architecture isn't studied in school, so it is natural that we can welcome people from a very diverse set of educational backgrounds. However, they need to be curious, they need to be creative. Ideally, they should be able to think critically, and they must be observant, hardworking, and interested in things around them. The way to begin to be an architect is to start looking at the world and studying it, studying the buildings you see and studying the cities that you come from. That's architecture. So we want people who will bring that curiosity to the subject area. The first architectural degree in the UAE is normally a 5-year degree, which covers the core knowledge required by an architect. In Europe, that is normally a 3-year degree with a 2-year postgraduate specialism. The fundamentals of architecture are often elaborated in master's courses, and there are many areas of interest which range from conservation, urban design, architecture and interior design, architecture and the environment. So architects are encouraged throughout their careers to continue to develop educationally, either through masters or through CPD, continuing professional development. These courses really enable architects to stay at the cutting edge of technologies and emerging knowledge. We're all aware that there are enormous changes for architects and for the world to address. One of the interesting things about this future is that design is located at the nexus of the future. So architects have an incredible role to play, not just in the traditional role of designing buildings, but also of imagining futures for cities, for our environment, and for the places we live in. So this kind of extension to the traditional role of the professional architect designing buildings means that they are employable in many sectors. You will see architects generally leading teams, working in design practices, working in studios, working at the interface with other creatives, probably working in Amazon and Google if necessary, and also leading the way in many organizations which are about the world we live in. So in the UN, in places like Architecture Sans Frontières, they will also be involved in environmental activism and organizations that work closely with the environment. Anywhere that there is a creative mind required, from a very small, tiny element of furniture to a piece of infrastructure or a large proposal for landscape, or even imagining a place on the moon. I see lots and lots of work for architects. So finally, is it worthwhile to choose architecture as a subject to study? I would argue yes. It's hard, it's challenging, but it's worth it. And it's worth it because the subject itself is so interesting to study, and it matters to the environment, to the world, and to the future. I'd recommend that there is a huge opportunity in the region and in the UAE for further development in this area. And I suggest that you consider this as an option for your forthcoming studies.